Good afternoon, everyone. As I've been already introduced, my name is Vidiya, and I have recently been elected as the director of the Bangladesh Garments Manufacturers and Exporters Association. Probably not the best time, given everything that you've been reading in the papers about Bangladesh. However, as Mr. Chris Cole has spoken in general about the industry and the textile and apparel industry, I'm going to focus in on Bangladesh. Not necessarily because it's where I come from, but because it is the second largest apparel manufacturing industry in the world right now. And we are in the middle of an absolute fix. The outline of my presentation will be, I will give you a brief history of Bangladesh, how we came about industrialization, growth, the low barriers to entry and exit and trade benefits, Bangladesh in the global value chain, the challenges that we've been faced with, obviously the recent incident, accident, whatever you may want to call it, took place, and the crossroad that we are in, which I've stated as a paradigm shift the way forward. First of all, Bangladesh, we used to be a part of East Pakistan. We used to be Pakistan basically, so there was the East and the West Pakistan. And after fighting with West Pakistan for 9 months, we gave birth to the People's Republic of Bangladesh with a parliamentary democracy. We don't have a secular government, we're not an Islamist country. The main industry before independence took place was jute milling on our side and textile milling on their side. And one of the reasons why it was textile milling on their side is because they were close to Afghanistan, which grew cotton, and they grew their own cotton. So back then, the ministries decided that it would make more sense for them to be in the textile industry. So soon after independence, what happened was our government decided to nationalize these industries. And of course, right after the war, in a premature government, amongst a lot of hue and cry, nationalization was the end of our jute milling industry and hence industrialization altogether. So in the end, people decided to depend on trading and indenting as ways of life and doing any small businesses. We became agencies of all kinds of things, of bringing in ships, we became agencies of flour milling, industries, machineries, and things like that. However, what Bangladesh did have was a large population, many poor landless families, cheap labor, low barriers to entry and exit. Port access was something very important that we had. We right now even have 2 ports, one in Chittagong, which is to the southeast of the country, and the other is the Mongla port, which is to the southwest of the southwest of the country. So given those advantages, and very few people with very intelligent brains, we came about our industrialization. In 1978, Desh Garments Limited of Bangladesh and Daewoo Corporation of South Korea started a joint venture agreement whereby they decided to send 130 workers of the executive level and also in promotion and everywhere else. Sent them to Daewoo's factory in Busan for 6 months and trained them in all aspects of the apparel industry, starting from store management, production, marketing, cutting, sewing, quality control, finishing, commercial exports and imports, all of it. 6 months later, these workers returned, and essentially the first ever 100% export-orientated garments factory was set up in Bangladesh. And that was the beginning of industrialization in Bangladesh. If I may add here, very proudly, that was the company that was set up by my father. So technically, he started industrialization in Bangladesh. Economic policies such as the back-to-back LC system, the customs bonded warehousing system, and the duty drawback gave a huge advantage to the people who were then deciding to set up apparel factories. And our government did us a huge favor by setting up export processing zones, which allowed the industry to flourish. If you can see from this graph here, in 1984, there were about 300 to 400 garment factories. And the number of factories in Bangladesh right now is about 5,000. So we've made huge progress in that space. This is another graph which shows that the total export compared to the export related to RMG. And you can see from here, again, that RMG is what we are all about. 70% of our GDP earnings, of our foreign exchange earnings, come from the garment industry. Our second foreign investment earner is sending out workers abroad. But that obviously doesn't create any work employment within the country itself. So we are basically totally dependent on the RMG industry. Now Bangladesh, as the garment industry, we entered in the assembly, the CNT stage, which is basically cutting, making and trims. So we got our orders from abroad, we got the fabric in, and we basically just cut it and make it and sent it off. And this was the general trend of the industries in the 1980s and the 1990s. Of course, the lure of competitive prices, low labor costs, good quality, and the amount of capacity that we were able to handle made us grow even faster. Bangladesh right now has about 5,000 factories, Indonesia 2,450, Vietnam 2,000, and Cambodia I think is bordering on 260 to about maybe 300. The industry also flourished hugely under the multi-fiber agreement and the tariff and quota-free access to the EU market under the GSP scheme since the early 80s gave us a huge advantage. Right now, obviously, I don't know how many of you might know, our government is strongly negotiating with the US to retain the GSP advantage, which I think we might be losing out on. So today, after we have actually, I must say proudly that we have mastered the CMT factories and we have moved on to the OEM productions. And OEM basically stands for Original Equipment Manufacturing, whereby we do the full package and we send the goods free on board, export it out. We are doing this, but at the same time, we are faced with Bangladesh in general has problems such as in the global value chain. The growth of the private and government training centers at the youth, now we are growing. In the last 10 years, there is the BGMEA, which is the Bangladesh Garments Manufacturers Exporters Association, which has set up training institutes. And universities have set up training programs. And at this moment in time, 30 years down the road, we are investing in training. We are also learning about lean management and productivity, and investments are taking place in research and development in the case of designing. However, as Mr. Prisco said, that we are not ready to jump into designing just as yet. The Bangladeshi garment industry has yet to reach the ODM and ODM stages of production, which would stand for the original designing manufacturing or the original brand manufacturing. In that case, we are still not producing any garments with our own labels. There are only about a handful of factories that have come about in the last 5 to 10 years, well, I would say 5 to 7 years, that have just come up with their own brands. I think there are 3 factories as such. So we are still very new to this whole concept of going on to the next level. The challenges that we are faced with in Bangladesh, obviously, is of most developing countries, is that we are facing very high inflation and increasing costs. Land is no longer cheaper, production cost isn't cheaper, and the price of logistics, because of infrastructure, is increasing. So the Bangladesh garment industry is now stepping out of the comfort zone of low-cost advantages that we have been in for so long. The workers are also demanding higher wages and benefits, not necessarily met by an increase in the price from the buyers. Recently, after the tragedy that took place in the Rana Plaza, many factories have closed down. There's a whole belt area of about 600-700 factories which are not working because workers are now even asking for lunch money. We already give them maternity leave. We give them extra benefits for maternity. We give them overtime, as you know. We give them traveling expenses. We give them housing. We give them free medical. We look after their children, so we offer them childcare. And on top of that, right now, given the inflation and everything else, they're asking us for lunch money and attendance bonuses of almost about $10 per month, so per worker. So our costs are increasing and increasing. And in no way, like I said, are the buyers increasing their prices in the same ratio. Hence, for us, it is a challenge right now. As far as infrastructure goes, and I would hate to say this because of course it is my own country, but the infrastructure in Bangladesh is almost dysfunctional. It takes me 45, I live in Dhaka city, which is the capital. My factory is in Chittagong, which is the port city. It takes me using a plane, it's a 45-minute flight. However, door to door, it's a 5-hour commute. So when we are talking about people sending their goods from Dhaka to Chittagong, with the roadworks, with the traffic, with the political situation, I will get to that later, it takes about anything between 8 to 16 hours. There's no guarantee, absolutely none. So often in many cases, the truck reaches the port and the containers are shut and they don't take the goods anymore. So these are problems that we're faced with. Compliance, again, this is a factor that is touching up on the recent accident tragedy. I've been corrected so many times when I've said accidents, and now I've kind of stopped saying accident because people are saying accidents like this should not happen. But compliance is becoming a big issue because right now, while there are many compliant factories, which are green factories, which are energy efficient, which go by the rules and regulations of every buyer of whatever they want, there are of course many, many factories who don't do that. And as a result, this is what happens, the Rana Plaza example, which is the building collapsing. Suppliers' performance and the supply of skilled workforce. Bangladesh must improve upon its productivity. Our productivity is low. It's much lower than India, it's much lower than Sri Lanka, and it's definitely much lower than China. Our workers they're efficient, but they're slow. Somewhere, something holds them back. They're slow. So that's something we must improve on. And we are yet to deliver on the customer requirements of more sophisticated products. Like I said, we're stuck at the CMT level. We cannot go beyond. We can make a t-shirt, but if you ask us to put on sequences on a t-shirt, then we're stuck. We can't do it. We don't know how to. We can make a simple jacket, but we cannot make anything that's far too complicated. Then there is a 26% shortage of skilled labor in the country. Mr. Chris Coe, again, I keep quoting him, and I will quoting him because while he was speaking, I was thinking so much of what he says is applying to so much of what I have to say. At this point in time, our government, our universities have decided to set up all kinds of fashion institutes. We don't have workers. What are we going to do in fashion institutes? That comes much later. Like I said, most of the workers that we employ who come in, they come in straight from their village homes. They're uneducated and they're unskilled. So the minimum wage that we do give to them, which is again so controversial in the Bangladeshi standard, in the global standard of what Bangladeshis pay to their workers, these workers don't know anything. We literally take them, sit them down in a machine, train them for 3 months, and hence starts their career. So, and there are absolutely no government or public training centers that will help them. I know recently that there are factories and who are setting up these small training centers. There are factories which we have the hip tracks and the workers, the indigenous people are very good at working. And there are factories who are setting up small training camps for these indigenous people. So they come, they train, and then they bring them to their factories. It's just a crazy process. And it's hardly very efficient at the end of the day because just like the industry is very easy to get into, the workers are very easy. They come when they want to work, they'll stay. There's no such thing as a binding contract in our country for these workers, and then they leave. You can train them, you can spend money on them, and they leave after 3 months. They'll go on to the next factory, or they'll go back home. So that again is a problem. There is a huge lack of investment in new machinery or new technologies. We are not doing any research work there, and we are definitely not investing in anything. Because, of course, the fact remains that labor is still very cheap. So, if any of you have ever visited a garment factory, there's a process, for example, spreading, where you get rolls of fabric and you have, there are two ways of doing it. The way we do it is that a bunch of young boys take the fabric from two corners and they run. And of course, if we try to put in any technology here, it would be investing in spreading machines. Now, of course, the spreading machine does it more accurately, but even me standing here, I believe in my workers because they're so much cheaper. Raw material. Bangladesh is dependent on imports of raw materials. So even factories, the textile factories that are making the yarns, they are dependent on importing the cotton. And in recent years, as you know, the prices have been volatile. Hence, this affects us. Of course, and also there is the lead time. So we are dependent as far as the backward linkages go. I guess that's another reason why we've still sort of homed in on the CMT industries, because it's so much easier when the buyer just sends the fabric and you just sew it. Finally, there is, of course, there's a gentleman here from the Chamber of Commerce from Bangladesh, and he will not like me saying this, but our politics, our politicians, our government, our opposition leader, I have no words for them. I just do not, because it would not be right for me to say anything, so I'd rather not say anything. But from not saying anything, you should understand how much despicable hatred that anybody has towards them. They're dysfunctional. In the last 5 months, there have been 61 days of hartans, locally known as hartans, otherwise known as strikes, where the whole country shuts down. They burn the trucks which are carrying the goods, they kill people, it's horrible. I mean, you cannot even go to work. Banks are closed, the port closes. We're just left there staring and thinking, now what? So we try and think of all kinds of things, like sending goods away at night, in the middle of the night, paying the inspectors who come to do the work in the middle of the night, we pay them extra. It's insane. And honestly, that I think is the biggest challenge of Bangladesh and its growth. Because as far as this country runs because of private individuals like us. We run the country. We have helped it grow economically, not the government. There was a long time ago, there was an interview in The Economist of the UK, and they asked my father basically, that what is your advice to the government? And it was back in 1985, I think, and he said that I have 2 words of advice. One is develop infrastructure and education, and leave the private sector alone. Until this day, they have done the right opposite. And of course, I call it the icing on the cake, it's hardly any icing, but it was the disaster of Rana Plaza, which ended up with leaving us in it's a complete nightmare now. 1,200 people died and 300 people are still missing. So maybe at the end of the day, it will all add up to about 1,500 people who have died. On the 24th of April, this 6-story floor, 8-story floor collapsed. It was a building that was not a purpose-built building. It was made as a shopping center. I will tell you a little bit of the history, and this kind of infringes upon what I've just talked about our government. The building was built by a local politician slash thug. He took, I'm sorry, I really should not be dissing my country so much, but these are all challenges to growth. And I suppose this is what we're here to talk about, so may as well be very direct about it, otherwise we'll be going around in circles forever. So this man took permission for a 6-story building, and he took permission for it to be a shopping center. He built 8 stores, and he set up 5 factories there, with 3 floors being shopping centers. Of course, because of the vibration, thank you so much. Of course, because of the vibration of all the machinery, the generators which were on the top, eventually the building collapsed. The night before the incident took place, what we call the TNO, which is a government authorized personnel who comes in to check the building, he was asked to come in, and he was asked, what do you think? And he said, oh, it's fine, it can work, it can function. And the next morning, the whole thing collapsed at 8 o'clock in the morning. So that's the reality for us. And it's a very bad time that we're facing, because of course the media is running us to the ground. And on this part, I will speak on behalf of my country, that no matter how bad the damage is, at the end of the day, if you're thinking about the interest of the country, then people like the government, the media, us, the BGMEA, players, stakeholders in the country should all work together. But no, forget the foreign media. Our own media is running us to the ground. So these are bordering on challenges that we are facing as far as growth is concerned. Otherwise, I think as far as Bangladesh is concerned, that we were doing good in being part of the global value chain. So of course, having said all that to you, now we are in the crossroad, and hence I've said a paradigm shift and a way forward. If we don't improve now, I think, of course, as I was talking to Mr. Joaquin Singh in the morning, sorry, I don't know if I got your name right, he said that they'll not shift so easily. Fair enough. Buyers can't shift tomorrow to another country. Maybe there's no capacity. Maybe you just don't take off. Maybe they will look bad if they just take off. But eventually, if it's a dysfunctional country and we've just been faced with such an accident, a year or 2, yes, they will shift. And then countries like, with all due respect, Cambodia, Vietnam, India, they're waiting for our orders, and they'll just grab it and snatch it, and that's the way it works. So, of course, the shift and the way forward. In the last week, I think, 2-3 weeks, I would say, there have been more congressmen and senators and UK MPs and ILO conferences and blah, blah, blah. Sorry, I shouldn't say blah. But all these people have come to Bangladesh and spent more time than they have probably in the last 30 years, asking us, what are you going to do? What next? Sign this paper, sign that paper. Buyers, sign this. You can't make buyers sign anything by force. They will leave, because there are options out there. However, going back to my slide, the 3 main stakeholders right now, the government, the suppliers and buyers must work together to overcome the challenges that we face. The government has to, at this point, invest in infrastructure, roads, ports. We don't have any electricity in Bangladesh. Mr. Prisco said land. Yes, land, and then we get land, and then we don't get any electricity, we don't get gas. I pay an electricity bill, and then I pay for the fuel for the generator that I run. I have 2 generators in the factory, one is a backup. Investing in a generator is a lot of money also. I could almost build a small factory with the price of that generator. But these are the places where we are stuck, and these are the challenges. And these are the things that if they're not fixed soon enough, we will just be, I don't know, going back to, I don't know what. So the government has to invest. They must invest in infrastructure, education, and they must support the trade. Suppliers must improve and invest upon middle and top management skills, provide more in-house training programs, ensure more attractive wages and benefit schemes, introduce lean concepts in production and management. We must look into creating our own brands so that we can step into the next stage of production. We must invest in designing, process upgrading, and product upgrading. Compliance has to, by right now, we just cannot think any other way, and we don't want to. Out of these 5,000 factories in Bangladesh, I think it would be fair to say that 50% are compliant. They're green factories, they're good factories, they have their 10 feet between the two lines. The workers wear masks, and all these things go on. But then, of course, this one building collapses, and then we are labeled as modern-day slave drivers by the priest, and let's not not the priest, the Pope. And I went to a Catholic school, but with all due respect, let's not question what happens in the Vatican itself. So, like I said, buyers also must invest upon their operational execution. The complexity that we are sometimes faced with of internal procedures involving the merchandising and sourcing functions often make the production process rather tedious at the suppliers at our end. They must improve upon their standards to ensure labor, social and environmental compliance, working along with the factories to improve the general standards. They must be more actively involved in our training programs given to the workers and management. And right now, what we are talking about, and then there is this agreement that we are making the buyers sign, is making sure that they involve themselves more in the factory standards of training and fire safety and health safety and all of that. And finally, we must acknowledge the need to increase prices throughout the industry. There is a huge gap between the FOB prices that are paid to us and the buyer selling prices. Often I have workers asking me, "Madam, what does this say?" And I said, "Well, it says $60. And she goes, "Well, that's the price of the handbag. How much did you get paid?" $5. So where is this gap? Where is this money? Where does it go? So of course there are all these things that need to be dealt with, and it's not easy. But these are things that, along with everything else in the bigger picture of things, must be addressed. Otherwise, it's not easy to remain in this global value chain that we speak of. Finally, a role for global bodies. Again, I think Mr. Cole has covered almost everything that I wanted to say. That international governing bodies must play an active role in encouraging and influencing our government to invest in education, training, and infrastructure. They should be told that if you do not, then we will pull out, and then we will have to pull out. They must pressurize governments into saying that you cannot have strikes for that many days, and you must control this. There are many other countries which don't have strikes like Bangladesh does, and we do. And they must highlight that political motives, fine. Every country has a way of doing things, but it is really driving foreign investors away. And we're scared. I have buyers who cancel meetings all the time because they don't want to come and be stuck in the hotel room for 3 days. It's a lot of time. So I think that's about it. I hope I've been able to shed some light on Bangladesh in the apparel industry and the challenges that we are being faced with in this day and age. The world is a very competitive place. I'm very cynical, and I think that if we do not change our ways very fast, then we will just go back to being all those industries shutting down. So thank you very much.
Mr. Scott, could I invite you down, please? Ms. Han, do you want to step up here? How much time do you have?